Hello, I'm Charlotte Carlson,
I am Jeremy Masterson.
And I am Sindre Taralin.
and this is our presentation for CSCI 455, and we worked on a library database system.
So the reason we wanted to work with a library data system is because we wanted something interesting but also reasonable in scope. And after doing some research, a common example of good projects or good work for projects like this, a library database system came up a lot. Um, So that's what we ended up with doing in the end. And for delivery one, we wanted our database to um, be accessed by a user who could borrow, look at, and see when to return not only books but also other media such as music, videos, um, audiobooks, those kind of things. So we wanted it to be more than just books. And we also needed someone to oversee how the user use system. So originally we added a librarian who would function as that person.
Yeah. So in Delivery 2, we refined on that idea and we took the media and broke it into different subtypes of media. We had books and journals and videos, and overall we kind of overexpanded. So we've toned that down a little bit. We kept users generally as they were. They can look, search through the books, borrow them, see when they need to be returned. For librarians, we split them into staff, which can create users and delete them, and can borrow out books, and that's about it. And then admins, which can actually edit users, and they can delete staff, and they can also edit the record somewhat. And then for actually storing what books are borrowed by who and where, we created a record table to store those transactions.
And with the implementation, we decided to use Python for GUI as our graphic user interface, since it was something we were all familiar with and it was rather simple. Queries wise, we also kept it pretty simple, implementing things like searches, adding, deleting, all all implemented through the GUI to make it really simple for the user to actually use. That being both normal users, staff, and administrators. Here's a sample of our UML diagram, which I'll turn
Yeah.
over to Jeremy to finish.
Yeah, so this is just our general outline that we had for delivery 2. We have the users in the bottom. It's generally how it's set up. We have the main media class on the left, which is still there um, as an overarching class, and the rest of the tables sort of inherit the attributes from the media class. Over to the right, we have the staff that can interact with the users and the record, and the admin also inherit from the staff. And then we have the record to store what books are borrowed by who, when they're returned.
All right, moving on. This is a sample of how one would look for the staff creating a new user to be entered in the database. In our first picture, we have our very basic staff client and what it would look like for them. which will be filled out more later with more options. Second is what would happen in when you add new user. It would ask you to fill out the 4 fields of name, address, phone number, and email. Well, once all those are filled out and you hit done, our third image will pop up showing them the user's ID, which is randomly generated within the client, and as well as just being a confirmation that the client was indeed added. As if it didn't pop up, the query ended up failing. And we should move on to our challenges.
Yeah, so for the diagrams, I talked before about how splitting the media into multiple subtypes created a lot of tables, and it just became a question of, do we leave it expanded or do we simplify it further? You still haven't completely solved those issues. Those will be completed for the final delivery.
So because of some time constraints, some of the use cases listed in the previous submissions have not yet been implemented at this point, but we're planning on having them in our database by the final delivery. So having to choose which ones we were to implement now versus later has been a bit of a challenge, but we feel that the ones that are implemented are ones that are the most necessary out of all of them.
And challenges implementation wise, our biggest ones were getting our GUI, our graphics user interface, to actually connect with our established SQL database, as it was a bit of a learning process, learning how to use the PYODBC, a tool made for Python, which eventually was we eventually worked through it after a fair couple hours of just researching, and some sacrifices we did end up making just through time constraints is normally, if we had the time, we'd try to make our user interface much more aesthetically pleasing. Currently, it's very Spartan, very utilitarian. But given time, if we continued to work on it, it would become much more aesthetically pleasing to our eyes. And moving on to tools used, we use Tkinter or TK-Inter, however you'd like to pronounce it, to make the graphic user interface part, as well as PYODBC, as I mentioned before. With our issues, we use to connect our GUI to the database.
We use Microsoft SQL Server and the Microsoft SQL Database Management System to actually set up the database, just for general database usage for SQL. And Draw.io we used for our UML diagrams and our other diagrams and our other deliveries.
All right, moving on.
Yeah, for remaining work, we need to finish the UML diagram and finish implementing the database. Generally, that's just finishing organizing the tables for media and how we're separating the media subtypes. We just need to finish figuring out how we want to store that data.
We also need to finish implementing the other planned use cases. As we said before, we did not have time to implement them all. Also, at least for now, we will show you what we did manage to get done by this time, and as well. And in the final delivery, you'll be able to see what we did implement and what we plan to implement all in one package. And now we'll move on to the demo to show you what we actually made. Demo. Hello, welcome to the demo. It's been like 2 actual seconds. This is our
Hopefully.
main view. That will change hopefully later. That is currently just meant for testing to give us access to our client, admin, and staff/employee views. If we have time, we'll implement a thing where you can enter your ID and it will point you to the right place. We'll start off with looking at our client view.
The client view has view info, which will show the current user info, and then update info, which will allow the user to change their own info.
Was his name Steve before? We'll do something better.
Dude.
There we go.
It works. And find content is a not yet implemented function to search through media in the database.
All right. When you close the client, it will ask you whether or not you want to commit your changes to the database before quitting. If you hit no, it will still close, but nothing you actually did will be saved into the database proper.
Okay, so the admin has access to 3 things. First one being adding staff, which requires a name and an address, which you put in. And when you hit done, should add the staff to our next button, as well as creating a staff ID, which is randomly generated. The view staff window is where you can cycle through the staff, where the staff added through the previous button can does work and can be seen in here.
You also have the previous testing staff, also named Bob.
The last button is removing staff, which requires a staff ID. Did you say it worked?
Yes. Do we want to start
Yes.
with a one that doesn't exist or one that does?
We can remove. I'll do one that doesn't actually. Yeah. So we put in a random number and try and click remove. A box will pop up that shows you that that is indeed not a ID that is found within the system. And if we try again with one that can actually be found in there, another pop-up shows up that tells you that it worked and the staff is now deleted from the list, which we can confirm.
I need to move that. There we go. There is only one entry.
Yeah.
And we have to, again, and it will ask us whether or not we want to commit the changes before we leave. And last one, we have our employee view, which is the least implemented at this point, which currently only has the option to add new users, prompting a name, an address, a phone number, and an email, which will only prompt up the new user ID once if the user has actually managed to be added. In this case, his ID is 1919. And like all the others, you'll have to commit the changes before you leave, or else they will not be saved. And other than that, that is all we have submitted, and that's all we have to demo, so cool beans.